and welcome to the 2020 UK Asexuality Conference. My name is Keith Derrick. I am a PhD student and author at Georgia State University, and today we are going to have a very interesting discussion about A-spectrum representation in fiction. We're going to talk about A-spectrum characters, A-spectrum narratives, what qualities we look for. So we have a lot of interesting topics to go over. And we have a very diverse series of panelists that we brought together for you to have this discussion with. So why don't we start with introductions? Char, would you start us off?
All right. I'm Char. I'm a librarian. I make videos about books on YouTube. I write ace fiction. Basically, I talk about ace fiction a lot, so I'm prepared for this panel. I'm going to move on to the next person. Oh, I'm ace arrow agender, so that helps me talk about this.
Thank you, Char. Mel, why don't we go with you next?
Sure. My name's Mel. I am a PhD candidate of Deakin University in Australia. I study representations of asexuality in young adult literature, and in particular, why so many of those representations are connoted with death. I'm also ace. I'm QPO-sexual.
Thank you, Mel. Deb, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Debra, Renée Byrd, she, her pronouns. I'm an indie fantasy author from Dover, Delaware in the US. I'm also demisexual, gray sexual, and I have a Tumblr blog dedicated to discovering demisexuality and the asexual spectrum in my 30s.
Thank you very much. Brittney, would you like to go next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Brittney Miles. I am a PhD student of sociology at the University of Cincinnati. My research is on Black girls, particularly around embodiment and asexuality. And I have found ace fiction as an ace person and felt super validated, particularly Black representation. And I'm excited to be here.
Thank you, Brittney. Aurora, would you like to finish us off?
Hi, I'm Aurora. I'm a self-published fantasy author. I write a lot of queer characters, especially, ace characters. And I am also QPO-sexual.
Thank you very much. Let me just start by saying thank you all for being here. And a big thanks to the moderators working behind the scenes to help us with the live captioning and the SliDo questions. For those of you watching at home, you can visit the SliDo link and propose questions. If you see a question on SliDo that you're particularly interested in, you can upvote it. And that way we'll see what questions the audience is really interested in. So if you want to go ahead and visit that link and get that started, we're going to start with a few general questions. In the essay, The Laugh of the Medusa, Helene Cixous made a really sort of dominant claim for écriture féminine, that women voices needed, women's literature about women, by women, for women. What is the role of own voices in A-spectrum literature? Do we need an écriture asexual?
Yes, would be my immediate answer. I think we shouldn't consider like asexual authors, own voices authors, immune from for sure some of like the kind of more problematic tropes have been written by own voices authors. It doesn't mean you get a free pass, but in general there should be a push toward more people writing about the identities that they themselves hold. It's the best way to have representation that reflects reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah,
go ahead, Char.
You go first.
Okay. Asexuality obviously isn't a monolith, so we are going to have those problems with even own voices writers writing about asexuality, but at the same time, I would prefer if asexual literature was written almost exclusively predominantly by asexuals because we're the ones who understand the most of what we're going through, even in a fictional setting. So instead of having someone looking on the outside of the window and writing what they think they see, I'd rather someone who is in it, understands it, write about it, and we can deal with the issues that happen, the problematic issues that happen. What am I trying to say? How just the difference is, a demisexual is going to write a different story than an acoisexual, so there's going to be differences, and it's just separating them out and seeing what works for you as an asexual reader.
I do like knowing if an author I've read identifies as asexual or asexual spectrum. And sometimes I'm surprised when they don't. Like I read Coffee Cake by Michaela Gray, which, warning, is an erotica. I didn't realize that going in. But I very much related to I appreciated the distinction between behavior and attraction, and that there's many different reasons that an asexual person might have sex with someone that they love. So I appreciated that. I think, at least in the case of this book, she must have done a lot of research and really seemed to understand the different scenarios that an ace person could be in. We got a request for it, the typing to be muted. Just in case you didn't see it. So yeah, I appreciate knowing its own voices, because then I'm going to be kind of more lenient, because there's been times that I'm like, is that ace? Because ace is such a big spectrum. And if I know that the author is ace, I'm going to consider more how that perspective could fit into the spectrum. And of course, I think, ace authors can make mistakes and can fall into aphobic tropes, but I think they're less likely to. And that when owl authors use an ace character, if they don't do enough research, it can very easily increase these negative stereotypes. Okay, I'm done talking.
I will just add that I am all for everyone writing from their unique positionality in the world, right from where you stand and from where you see yourself and see the world, because there are people who are not ace who may have an ace partner. Right from that position, there is nothing wrong with that, but potentially writing for a marginalized community, you run the risk of, readers like myself who may be young in their identity or young in their discovering love of literature or whatever it may be, who are going to use that literature as a starting point in making sense of their world. And going for the most authentic representation is, I think, most important. Even if that representation isn't perfect.
There's a comment I want to highlight. Matea Hernandez said people shouldn't have to come out to prove that they know what they're writing about. And I absolutely agree that there's lots of ace books I've read that are written by authors that haven't really specified their own orientation. And, I don't take that either way. Maybe they're allo, maybe they're ace. Yeah. Right, I'm more talking about authors who have implied that they're not ace or have labeled themselves as ace, where we know and we can discuss from there.
I think, if I can just jump in real quick, I would say, because I'm seeing a couple comments, you don't need to be ace to write an ace character. That would be absurd. What you do need to be, I think, is an ace ally. I think it's really important that you have done your research into what asexuality is or can look like. There are so many different kinds of asexuality, but if someone is including an ace character as a curiosity or some kind of personality trait, then obviously there's a problem there. The problem isn't necessarily who's writing the character, but why and how much thought they've put into that character and what that character actually stands for in a moment like this.
I agree. We have throughout all human history, there's this pattern of allonormativity. So it's so steeped into our culture that it's hard to sometimes even identify. Even ace authors can sometimes write an asexual character that you feel is not a good representation of an asexual character. So there is a lot of subjectivity involved in that.
And I wanted to add on to Mel's point that research isn't spending a few hours scrolling through forums and info pages. Research is talking to asexual people. It's getting sensitivity readers. You're not going to be able to fully understand asexuality just from reading about it. Okay. It's 10 minutes in. Does anyone have any last comments for our own voices?
But that does offer a nice transition for us for our next question. How important is it to you that a character be labeled a-spectrum? So if you have an a-spectrum character, is it important to you that they are labeled asexual or aromantic? Or do you think that the sort of discourse that comes from that character being questionably asexual or aromantic is beneficial as well?
I think representation should be explicit. I think that if an author wants to write an asexual character and get the kind of brownie points for that representation, then you need to say it on the page. It's not enough to say it in paratext, in a blog post, or in an interview later. You have to say it on the page. And so there's some wiggle room here. Obviously, like there might be an asexual character in a fantasy setting where the word asexual isn't part of their language or lexicon, but it should still be explicit. You shouldn't be able to miss it on a read.
Another note on that, the first asexual character that I really connected to was actually written by an allo author, Kel from the Protector of the Small series by Tamara Pierce. She's come out and said that Kel is an aro ace character, and she actually regrets that she didn't say Kel was ace, and I wish she had, because I would have realized I was ace sooner if I had seen the word on the page, or at least some description. So it's also that angle of people who maybe don't know what being ace is can find it easier.
I think
you go first.
All right. I think when we talk about labeling the character as ace explicitly, I think you mentioned a great point about description. I don't need the name necessarily, but I do think rich description amid your storytelling helps me connect with any and all of your characters, especially where we fall into contexts where ace might not be a word or the word used to describe one's, politics. However, I will say that description is what I connect with. The substantive and descriptive experience more so than the label itself, because oftentimes the labels aren't exactly, the best or appropriately used all the time, or exactly the label I identify with. But that description about how they feel about themselves, about the world, and about their relationships, that tells me what I need to know. And that for me needs to be the priority when it comes to storytelling and writing.
An example I would bring up is, because it's really popular, Ladies' Guide to Petticoats and Piracy. The protagonist's name is escaping me, but the main character is very unambiguously ace, but because it's historical fiction, she doesn't necessarily know the word asexual. And reading that is probably, that's the first thing I think of. You can't read that and not understand that she's ace, but you can also understand why the word isn't there on the page.
When I review ace representation, I think of it in terms of, was it implied, labeled, explained, reflected on, impacts the plot, or central to the story? And I don't think any of these are superior. They're all necessary, but that implies category is really oversaturated. And, like Aurora said, I've actually seen multiple author interviews where they say they regret not labeling the character clearly as ace or arrow. And that's kind of frustrating to me because I feel like it's frustrating and understandable because I feel like the authors are trying to protect themselves because there's a lot of, definitions controversy around asexuality. So even if you are ace and you write your own experience, you're going to have people downvoting your book because it doesn't match their view of asexuality. So that's even more risky for an ally author to try to express an asexual character. So I understand their hesitancy to make it really clear. But at the same time, stop implying your sociopath is ace.
Yeah.
I do think though that there is some value. I mean, and I honestly, and I would always prefer great ace or arrow representation in a book. I really would. But I think because part of our community's problem is visibility,
Yes.
sometimes even bad representation, it can start a dialogue and it can bring people to realize, it gives us an opportunity to explain, okay, why is this bad representation? Why should we get good representation? And
We've got
then
thousands of examples of bad rep. We don't need more.
I feel
think
like it's a stepping stone, though, in a way.
Sure.
The bad representations kind of come first, and from there we figure out how to get to the good ones. But at the same time, they're absolutely deserving of critique, and the more critique, the happier I will be.
And the other problem is that a lot of people don't look for the conversations. They'll see the one bad rep, they'll internalize it, and they'll never interact with the community. And so they only have this one specific view that is not accurate or inclusive or both.
I think this is kind of a good jumping off point for our next question. What stereotypes do you see most often? Like, what are the stereotypes that really bother you the most in regards to ace representation, arrow representation? Like, what are the what happens to you when you read a book and you see something that you've seen 1,000 times before? Like the trope that the one that gets me the most is that asexuals are robotic and that bothers me the most. But I'm kind of curious what you guys feel on this subject.
I feel passionately about this. So I think the most common ones I see are the robot, broken or incompetent and childish. And I get really frustrated, vicious. I know some people are like, no, secretly he's a caring guy, but I'm like, no, that's just in your head. On the page, he's really cold-hearted, and it's framed as his asexuality is part of his social incompetence and failing to get the girl. And it's not even explicitly labeled as word of God. So that kind of rep really bothers me because, Vicious is a wonderfully written book by a really popular author. So it gets at the top of all those ace lists. Same with Daughter of Smoke and Bone, where it's a side character who's childish, and in the second book, that really frustrates me that popular authors kind of dip their toe in problematic representation and then float to the top, and then that's what's seen. That's what people pick when they're like, all right, it's a queer readathon, everyone go get an ace book. Okay, rant over. But yeah, those are the three main
my work is into a very specific stereotype in asexual fiction where an asexual character is othered in the most extreme way. They're othered as someone who is not really alive. It's more common than you would think, and it's upsettingly common. Essentially, the gist of it is that an asexual character will be written as somehow missing that spark of life that all those nice lust-feeling people get. And because of that, they have to be contained. They have to be sent to the world of the dead, or, to space, or something else. So in that way, like, asexual characters are sometimes pushed out of our society. They're othered. So they might be a robot, or an alien, or they might go to space and not come back, or maybe they go to the world of the dead and they don't come back. And it sucks, and I hate it. So I think, like, a lot of those kind of major stereotypes come down to the idea that asexuals are not human. In one way or another, they are missing the nice bit of, emotion and happy feelings that other people have. And that is just so not on. It's so upsettingly, what's the word I'm looking for? There's no nuance. It's just very in your face. It's very abrupt. And yeah, so that's kind of what I look at. It really, yeah.
I would like to not see anymore the overbearing parents or the broken home.
Yeah.
Like, some of us don't have, like, it almost makes it seem like it's a response, or they're asexual because of their bad living situation. Like, and it's kind of weird to see. I've seen that in a few books now. Or also one I definitely never want to see again is the pedophile. Like, they're an asexual, but they have a weird affinity for children. Can we not? Because just full stop.
Maybe less upsetting than that. There's one that's Allo Savior. Oh, I hate Allo Savior. It's where the asexual character doesn't know what's wrong with them until their allo friend comes along and says, "Hey, have you heard about this?" And it's just so frustrating to read. It's like, are you really? Because like a lot of ace people, I figured out I was ace when I Googled "kissing feels bad, what's wrong with me?" And at least that I got to find it out myself. I got to be the one who found that knowledge. And I think that's, like, a lot of ace people have a similar story about how they Googled it and they found Avon, or they found a community. And to have it just be in a book like, "Oh, my friend told me this," is just kind of like, what? What?
No offense to our allo friends, but if we didn't know, I'm almost sure you didn't either.
Like, I found out from another
One of my
ace
favorite
making a
scenes.
joke on Tumblr.
One of my favorite scenes in ace fiction is, like, the ace character going on a research binge. Like, they've run across this idea and then they're really excited and they figure it out. And the first time I read, the first time I read the Allo Savior thing, I thought it was adorable, but it
gets old. Gets old real
not when
quick.
it's a pattern.
Okay, so a lot of the discussion has been revolving around what the role of asexuals are in fiction. What about sex? What is the role that sex should play in a-spectrum fiction? Should there be explicit acts of sex? Should there not be? I know there's a wide variety of opinions on this subject. I'd like to hear what everyone has to say.
I feel very strongly about this as, like, a QPO-sexual, and there's a couple QPO-sexuals in the call, but I'm one of those aces who still wants to have a sexual relationship for reasons other than, obviously I don't experience sexual attraction, but I still want that to be a part of my relationship. And I think there is a lot of gatekeeping for sex-favorable aces who, for whatever reason, still want to have sex. Because it's hard enough to get someone to understand, I don't want sex. It's a lot harder to get them to understand, I don't want sex, but I do for other reasons. And that is entrenched in asexuality fiction. Normally, asexuality is represented as an aromantic kind of asexuality, which is important, but there should be other sides of the prism shown. We should be able to see that there are aces that still negotiate that force in their life rather than just explicitly get rid of it. And it's hard because we work in a kind of a space where there's next to no desexualized spaces, and they're so important to ace people. but it is so isolating to be an ace person who's sex favorable, who's kind of on the margins of everything. So that's sort of how I feel about it. I feel like we owe it to ourselves to try to write it, because yeah, it's complicated, yeah, it's hard, yeah, it's difficult to explain, but it's life for a lot of us. That's life.
I think more generally, I'm sorry.
No, you go.
I want to acknowledge real quick in the comments.
Oh.
I want to acknowledge in the comments really quick that there's multiple people talking about how it was their allo partner or an allo friend who introduced them to asexuality. So even though allo saviors a stereotype, it also is true to a lot of people. Okay, I'm done.
And I think to that point, saving someone and kind of claiming something for yourself and needing to be validated in that role for exposing them or giving them resources is different than, you know, being a caring friend and person in the ACEs person's life. I think there's that savior complex that complicates that. But I think to this question, I think exactly to your point, sex must be nuanced. I think when we talk about ACE representation, we're trying to talk about a spectrum, an actual spectrum, and a spectrum of representations that are complicated. And people have complicated relationships to sex. And I think sex is the greatest opportunity for nuance and complexity so that we don't become flattened in our depiction of what it means to be ACE. And as we have ACE people making hashtags, you know, this is what an ACE looks like, you know, this is all these different aspects of being in the world. Sex is just one more layer that helps us complicate how we depict and what we understand ACE-ness to be.
I think it's important in aspec fiction that the author is aware that they're writing to an ace audience, which will include more sex repulsed, sex averse, and it's really important to be clear if it's erotica, if there's going to be a sex scene at all. Like Perfect Rhythm by Jay, the chapter where the characters have sex is clearly labeled, and the chapter's cut off in a way where you could just skip that and not miss anything key to the story. And someone in the comments was talking about how they'd prefer if asexuals who have sex was left to aspec authors, because when allos do it, that's a really risky area. But Michaela Gray, who wrote Coffee Cake, as far as I know, is not aspec. In an interview, she talked about this started as a writing prompt, and she supports the community. So I feel like she would have mentioned it then if she wanted to be openly aspec. But I still really appreciated that representation because I felt like I could really connect to his reasoning for having sex without attraction. So it is possible to do it well. I know some people have flagged that as problematic, but I think maybe they're just flagging it as problematic because it's erotica. They weren't really clear about why it was problematic. So yeah, know your audience and give people a heads up that, like, yes, have a diverse spectrum of different sexual behaviors for asexual people, but flag it.
Yeah, and I just wanted to chime in real quick. I absolutely agree with Brittney's point that, you know, asexuality is not just about sex. It's a whole culture, and it informs every aspect of our personality. So, you know, just having an asexual character and their asexuality is only expressed through how they interact with sex, you're not adding enough diversity and dimension to that character. That's not, I think, an adequate representation of what an asexual person is. While yes, sex is a huge part of what asexuality is, it's not the only part. So I really think that is important, and I really appreciate that Brittney brought that up. Do we have any more thoughts on this, or do we want to kind of move on to the SliDo questions?
I think just the one last thing I wanted to say on it that kind of touches back on like stereotypes and things is what I'll see when people ask for ace books. A lot of times what people will do is they'll start literally equating, oh, this is an asexual book because it doesn't have sex in it. and none of the characters are actually asexual. None of them are meant to be read as asexual. It just doesn't have sex in it, which is just the stereotype of all aces are sex repulsed, when that's not quite what it is, or what people are generally looking for when they ask for ace fiction.
I think that's really symptomatic of a representation-starved audience, where people are looking and they'll take scraps because there's so little out there that if you can even find a book where there's no sex in it, that some people will latch onto that. Which is it's the reality, but it's a little sad because you can do better and you do deserve better, and there are better representations out there. I just wish they were more visible.
I ran across a review of, what's the book called? A Highly Logical Behavior, where they were interpreting a straight guy as asexual biromantic. And I feel like they were kind of taking two scenes that like could kind of be ace, like not wanting to have sex with his girlfriend yet, and kind of nudity being desexualized because he's in sports, where these are explained where he just doesn't feel ready for sex. That's not exclusively an ace thing. And I think we need to be careful as a community that we're not problematically headcanoning things just in our desperation for representation, that there is representation out there that is intended to be representation. And if we grab up everyone who doesn't want sex yet, or makes a sexual blunder, that makes it seem like that's what asexuality is.
Okay, I think that's a really good spot to kind of transition to the SliDo questions, because I know everyone in the comments section is getting a little anxious about that. So why don't we move on to this question was posed and it got a lot of upvotes. So what are the 3 best examples of ace representation and why?
I have a favorite.
Yeah,
I know my favorite.
I don't think we can go into everyone giving their 3 best examples, but maybe we could each posit one and give our explanation as to why we think that's a great representation.
I adore a character named Rumi from a book called Summerbird Blue by Akemi Dawn Bowman. It is, without any reservation in my voice, the best book I have read with an asexual main character. I know that when you say this is my favorite, a lot of people might come forward to be like, oh, but it's actually this. I love it. It's this really touching story of a girl coming back from grief, and I felt so seen when I read that book. I felt very, very seen. So it would be Rumi for me.
I loved Blank Spaces by Cass Lennox. It's male-male romance, and so one of the romantic leads is hypersexual and one is asexual, but doesn't know it yet. And so both, because of their sexualities, have decided that they shouldn't do committed relationships. And it's really interesting there's such deep character development. I loved that the sexual character wasn't demonized or implied that they ought to have less sex. It's just that they needed a committed relationship and needed to be able to trust that. And it had so many of my favorite things. It had like a research binge, excitement once he learns about asexuality. It had him trying to theorize about asexuality and himself before knowing that it's a thing. It had him using this really beautiful metaphor to try to like explain himself. And then it even ends up, spoilers, there is sexual activity at the end of the book. And I really appreciate getting to see a character have those conversations with an allosexual partner about like, this is what I'm comfortable with, and then kind of showing what sex is like to someone who doesn't experience attraction, but isn't repulsed. And that's also own voices. So yay. Okay, I'm done talking.
I mentioned it earlier, but Kel from The Protector of the Small is just very near and dear to my heart because I really connected with the character and just how she saw the world. And like I said, I didn't find out I was Ace till much later, and I didn't find out that Kel was Ace until even later after that. But just that retroactive feeling of validation of having a character who is so connected to her friends and family and all of that, and just knowing that this is a character who's like me was very validating and very nice.
I love what's happening in the comments. I love that somebody's really quickly writing them down so that everyone can see. I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
For
throw
me,
in really
let's
fast.
talk about love. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Deb, go ahead.
Oh,
No,
let's talk
James,
about
we're
love.
about to say the same thing. So yeah, go ahead and say it.
For me, let's talk about love as a Black Ace person. I
This
just
is
have
the
to,
cover of Let's Talk About Love.
yes,
It's
exactly.
a black
Yes,
asexual
that's
woman. It's in the ace colors. The entire jacket is in the ace colors.
and it's stunning.
It is gorgeous. It is an amazing book. Please get it. It'll change your life.
And I would say the representation, you know, it's not always
Really, that
perfect.
upset me. I feel like it's
Go ahead.
the romantic feels very manipulative to me, and
Yes.
there's problems that aren't addressed in his behavior to her.
Absolutely.
So I wish there was more Black asexual fiction to recommend, such as Sawkill Girls. I think that was great.
I love
But that's
Sawkill
horror, so
Girls.
personally I had a hard time reading it.
Sawkill
But I
Girls is
will
a fantastic book.
I will say, Let's Talk About Love meant so much to me as a Black ace, especially in these tropes that are irritating in other contexts where like that childishness or childlikeness can be really problematic. But then at the intersection of like Black girl joy, it means something radically different, you know, to me. Now, I agree that that relationship, the manipulation, the toxicity, problematic as all heck, but people are like that in the world. And because that wasn't necessarily projected onto the ace character herself, for me, it was so validating. And though not perfect, because rarely is anything, it was important to think about for me, especially in, you know, I wrote about this in research, but also as a reader, constantly thinking about what does it mean to be ace and having these layers of identity that may complicate how we understand what it means to be ace, and those politics about how you move through the world in that identity. So that was super important to me. But again, I agree. Definitely not perfect.
It's interesting. I never had a problem with the romantic relationship. I hate her best friend. I hate
horrible.
Feeney's awful. I don't understand.
Honestly, all her relationships are problematic. She needs to cut
Yeah.
ties with her family, with her friends, with the guy. Just get free.
Everybody.
I don't mind Sukumi, but God, Feeney did my head in. For the people in the comments, look forward to reading that at me, whether you think Feeney is a good person or not.
Deb, were you gonna say what is it about Let's Talk About Love?
Although I often find that when I
just how when she first met him and she had those sexual feelings and she was terrified and was like, but I don't want them. I think that was a big, that's kind of me. Like I finally saw, I think because that was the first ace book I actually picked up. So it was good to see that layer of having the feelings and not wanting or understanding them at all. And not even acting on them, because if I don't want to spoil anything in the book, but that was a breath of fresh air to see.
Yeah.
There is something really rewarding about reading a book and then finding a character that you identify with so perfectly and then just feeling validated as a human being. I mean, I don't know a lot of contemporary ace fiction, but I suppose if I had to pick one, like my specialty is the long 19th century British literature. So I kind of reclaim characters, you know, because they didn't have asexuality as an identity then. It was just an orientation. So I tend to find characters that fit into that orientation. And I think my favorite would be George Emerson from A Room with a View. He's incredibly hyper romantic, but physically, there's almost no sexualization going on with his character whatsoever, which is in stark contrast to the other characters in the book. So it's, I know a lot of people accuse me of making headcanon and shipping characters and whatnot, but I think that he very much so expresses what an asexual would have been if you can't call yourself asexual. If you don't have that word in your lexicon, the way he describes himself, the way he acts, I think he's a really interesting representation of an asexual in fiction prior to the Kinsey studies and the Strom's essay sort of identifying asexuality as an identity.
I think there's
I
a
want to
power
mention
in
that I put my list of asexual databases and reviewers and lists in the chat, and I will ask someone to add it to the description after this live stream.
Excellent. Thank you, Char. Do we want to move on to the next question, or are we okay? So our next question is, what do you look for as indicators of a character being asexual when they aren't confirmed as ace in a story? And this kind of plays back to our question about ace labeling. How do you identify a character who's ace when they aren't labeled as ace?
I usually look for characters who, regardless of their relation to the physical act of sex, don't get attraction, or they don't understand it, or they just kind of don't get the whole romance thing. Like I said, I found out about asexuality from a Tumblr post, which was, I thought all those scenes in romance books where people just get completely consumed by lust were fake, and then I found out I was asexual. And my first response to that was, wait, that actually happens? And then Googling asexual. So that's what it is usually for me, for as indicators of character, because it is a very wide spectrum, lots of different experiences. So basically the only thing I look for is, do they feel sexual attraction, and do they get it?
I'm so glad you said that, because I was going to say a similar thing. I look for confusion, and I'm not saying all aces are confused, but for me, that's definitely how I felt, navigating romance and stuff for the first time. I was so confused. I didn't get it. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know why kissing sucked. So when I see a character who's like, wait, what's going on? This isn't how it's meant to be. I'm like, oh, girl, I know, I remember. I know exactly how you feel. So yeah, that's always been a kind of homing beacon to me.
I look for, or at least I guess my favorite part that I connect with is feeling different. That, it's not wanting sex in a certain circumstance. It's not getting a sex joke. It's feeling at odds from your peers in terms of what they want versus what you think you want. Those internal thoughts are really important to me, because asexuality is an orientation, not behavior. So I really resist a lot of headcanon. And I think there is a place for headcanon. I'm not just saying all headcanon. Just personally, I'm kind of disappointed if I realize, oh, this was only on an ace list because it's been headcanoned, and I don't think the author even intended this to be ace, and I don't even see this character as maybe seeing themselves as ace, convenience store woman. She's not interested in sex, but there's just a lot she's not interested in. I don't think she would identify herself as asexual. Someone else says oh, do you think you're asexual? And she doesn't even answer that question. So I don't know, maybe we can just have a character who's not interested in sex and not call them asexual.
Yeah, I think there is a real danger in that, because, just like you wouldn't want someone mislabeling your sexual identity, I think we need to treat literary characters as if they're real people that have real feelings and real emotions, and identifying them as asexual when they aren't necessarily when they aren't explicitly asexual is dangerous because it sort of reduces their agency.
And I agree that there's more freedom in pre-Kinsey because we can guess that the author may have intended to express asexuality without having those terms.
I think one of the things I generally look for is how the author in general deals with sex, and then apply that general application toward that specific character. So if say, for example, in Candide, Voltaire every male character in that novel just mistreats women sexually constantly. That's what they are there for. He sexually commodifies women. Candide, on the other hand, he doesn't participate in that. So it's an odd thing that the main character of this novel does not participate in the sexual commodification of women, right? So it leaves room for us to discuss the possibility that he may be on the spectrum somewhere.
Since we're running out of time, there were two questions I really wanted to answer. The first was, how can non-creators, like non-writers, support ace representation? And I would say, share the positive ace rep you see, and call out, even if it's just to your close friends, the negative ace rep you see, because I don't think allo people really, it won't click for them that that's negative rep. So it is important to highlight that. And the other question is, what advice would you give people looking to write ace spectrum characters? There's a video by Julian Greystoke that goes into a lot of detail and great advice about, different attractions, what isn't asexuality, kind of discourages a lot of the negative tropes, like, try to avoid robots, try to avoid a sexual assault survivor. Like, even though, you can have had trauma and be ace, there's a lot of that in fiction. So if you use it, she goes through a great list. I'm not going to try and summarize it right now.
Does anyone else have any ideas on what people who are not creators, how they can sort of affect ace representation?
Be critical.
Yeah.
Be critical. Read with a critical eye. Don't accept stuff just because it's on the page. If something bothers you, think about why it bothers you. Think about what's wrong here and talk about it. Post reviews, post blog posts, post on your Facebook, recommend it to your friends, or, disparage it to your friends, but talk about it. Put it out, make there be discourse. It starts with us. It just starts with us.
I would also say look for ace creators and look for ace people who are professionals or even just amateurs that are critiquing that media themselves. Like, if you find the best way to learn about a community and its struggles, I've always found, is to find that community space and shut up. Don't insert you are not that community. Don't insert yourself into that community. Just find that space, sit there and listen. Don't try to add your opinion in, just listen.
I would add, though, if you are in that community in various ways, including from a place of allyship, listening is key, but also write in a way that's authentic to your core as far as storytelling, and trust yourself. But most importantly, in creating, you've got to have a creative community. You've got to have kind of a learning community, if you will, where you can workshop ideas. You can also speak into the void, that is Tumblr, and I'm sure people will give you all kinds of probably too much stuff to process, but finding a community of folks, even if you only know them by their hashtag or their Instagram handle, that's okay. But it's not just, it's listening, but it's also the balance between listening and really speaking, engaging, critiquing yourself, and really looking at your work in a way that negotiates between authenticity, care, research, and thoughtfulness, but also just refinement. Thinking about, has this gone through layers of revision where you can trust what you're putting out there and kind of the implications of that in a representationally starved community, which is not a load you must bear alone, but it's something to think about.
I wanted to
Okay.
add to advice for people writing ace characters that it doesn't matter if you're ace or you're allo, you've been affected by an aphobic society, so your gut feeling about what an ace character should be is probably laced with some aphobia, so it's really important, no matter who you are, to give the sensitivity readers to be critical of your own perception of asexuality.
Okay. I think that's a good place to end things. There are a couple of questions in the comments about those of us that are doing research and those of us that have written books, like where they can find out more information about that. I know I will be on the research panel if you want to talk to me about the research. And we also have an ACE gather room for ACE creators. If anyone wants to go there to learn more and interact. So I had a lot of fun. I want to thank all our panelists. And I want to thank everyone at Avon, and I want to thank all the moderators who are working behind the scenes to do the live captioning and for moderating the SliDo questions. You guys are champs. So I really want to thank everyone. This was a fun event, and I look forward to maybe seeing you guys next year.
And my YouTube channel is
Yeah.
CharCharChar, so you can get more ace fiction videos there.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.